I just wish you could see this, Dad. I bet it would have made you proud. Whenever I finish a project, I keep thinking that I would like to show you what I did. But then I remember I can't. For this project, I decided I would do it anyways. This is for you, Dad. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. I must have been 9 years old. It was a warm summer evening. The sun was playing tricks on our biological clocks, and it was probably much later in the evening than I wanted to believe. My 2 childhood friends and I were outside playing just in front of our house. The memories are vague, but I still remember the feeling when Dad opened the door and said it was time to come in. The feeling of injustice. Why should I go inside when we were having so much fun, and my friends didn't have to go home? So I defied him. I can't remember doing that often, but this time I felt what we today would refer to as FOMO. I didn't want to miss out on all the fun. Dad insisted that I come in because it was late, but I didn't see the logic in stopping our playtime. I thought Dad was being too principled, even if I couldn't put that feeling into words back then. It would be a few years before the next confrontation, at least as I remember it, which might be why I recall it so well because it happened so rarely. This second time it was the exact same argument. I was supposed to go inside, but I refused. I remember grabbing the headlight wiper blade of the white Mercedes and threatening to tear it off if I couldn't stay out a bit longer. But my threat didn't last long because the wiper blade came off almost immediately by accident. And I ended up holding it in my hand. Now, I don't know if I remember it correctly or if it's a memory of a memory, but I think Dad chased after me, and I ran away in fear. Dad could instill a certain fear in me and my siblings, but since I was the eldest, I think I perceived it the worst. Once, when we were making tremendous noise at the dinner table, he slammed a pot onto the kitchen table with full force and stormed out of the house. It wasn't until I had children of my own that I realized I had inherited Dad's sensitivity to noise. I can't handle loud and multiple sounds at once. It feels like my brain is being overwhelmed. Perhaps a bit like how I imagine a schizophrenic person perceives the world. But the fear was nowhere near the worst feeling I had about Dad. It was way worse. But first, let me fill you in on this project. When planning this project, I knew right away that if I could follow through with it, it would be something I would proudly show off. And it got me thinking of why we want to show it and who we want to show it to. Who do you want to show your creations to? And as always, when starting a new project, I doubt myself. The thing is, though, that there is something I think you do as well as anyone else, and it's self-doubt, or imposter syndrome, where you're just waiting for someone to call you out as the fraud you feel like. The funny thing is, I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome some way or another, no matter how good we are. At least for me, I've always felt that I can't show off my products because I don't think they're good enough. Someone will look at them and go, "You think that's any good?" Fortunately though, I think I might have found a way to say "f*** you" to imposter syndrome, and I'll tell you how later. When starting this project, I knew that I had many things I had to do for the first time. I've been woodworking for about 5 years now, but every new project there's usually something I've never done before, but I think there's something in me that makes me force myself to learn new things. I've been like that my entire life, and I've never stayed with anything to make me a true professional at anything, but sufficiently good at a lot of stuff. This part of the build is me trying to turn the glued up walnut into a perfect round circle by using a very cool router jig from USSA Design. It lets you mount basically any router to it, and then you can do a lot of things with it. One of them is cutting a circle. But I knew something else was waiting me that I'd never done before that would require my full concentration to make it work. So I'll go ahead and explain the top part of this dream project of mine. It's a stool. The top is a round seat with a heavy chamfer. So far I've only made the top, so the next step is the chamfer. Now the chamfer needs to be done according to my plans because I will have a 3D printed part that attaches the seat to the threaded dowel I'll be making. Fortunately for me, Sam from Monkey Boy's workshop has a great video showing off a way to make a chamfer jig for a palm rider. So I just followed along him making that and I made my own version of it. Since I wanted a special angle on mine, I made sure it would have just that angle, because if not, it won't fit the 3D printed part. So then, how does the imposter syndrome and YouTube go together? Well, there are a lot of choices when it comes to video. I don't have to show my mistakes. I can just hide them if I want to. But I want to show the mistakes. I want to be upfront with what it looks like. Now, getting back to my story about my father. The absolute worst feeling I've ever experienced with Dad wasn't fear or being treated badly at all. He was a good dad. The worst feeling I felt was that I felt sorry for him. And I only realized that the last time I ever felt it, which was when he got ill. It's reasonable when someone is ill to feel sorry for them, but it's also one of the worst feelings one can have for a parent, because you want to do something to change it. But I didn't know what. I then realized that I'd had that feeling many times before, but on a smaller scale, of course. Me and my two friends walked to school together every day. I would go to Ula's house, wait for a few minutes for him to get ready, then we'd go to Oscar's and wait a few more minutes for him. This one day it was cold and slippery and we took a different route. After a little while we heard a bicycle bell ring, and shortly after Dad passed us and waved cheerfully. Just seconds later, his bike slipped away from him and he landed flat on the cold, hard, icy asphalt. I remember feeling sorry for him all day. It was a tough feeling that had appeared for the first time, but not for the last time. Dad often worked on projects at home. He wasn't naturally skilled at building, but he was persistent and creative, and it always turned into something. Dad's way of proudly showing off his projects made me look up to his creativity, and especially his curiosity. It sounds like he wasn't very good at making, but he really was. His stubbornness meant that things took longer than they would for an experienced carpenter, but the results were basically the same. When I was moving out, for example, he built a kitchen table for me based on a model we saw in a store that was way too expensive for me to buy. That table lasted me a long time and meant a lot to me. If you've seen my previous video, you might already know how I went about making the threads on the dowel, but to fill you in, I found a tool that would do it for me, but it was $1,000 just for the 44mm dowels I have, and that was way too much to pay for a single tool. So I decided to solve it and found a way to make it using a 3D printer and my router table instead.
It works! It works! It actually works!
And it actually turned out to be really good. I would say better because I didn't have to battle the wood splintering as much as you would with a tap and die. If you want to see the process more in detail, my last video is all about making the threads. Throughout this video you might have noticed I used a lot of 3D printing. All the prints for the stool were made in carbon fiber reinforced nylon, which gives you really strong components. To print that, you need an encased printer because the material requires a lot of heat. If you don't have that, there are resources out there to help you, one of which is the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. It might be the rare cases when you need to print in stronger materials, and then you can use PCBWay's 3D printing service to help you out. Upload the file that you want to print to their website, choose the material, and they will quote you a price. Then you can order and they will deliver it to you. Thanks PCBWay for sponsoring today's video. A few years ago, my then soon-to-be wife and I started a big project to restore a barn to be able to get married in it. Dad was there when we were replacing the roof. My father-in-law, who has a lot of building experience and quick logical thinking, led the work, and Dad couldn't quite keep up, which made me feel sorry for him again. By accident, one of the beams holding up the roof came loose and fell. It hit Dad on the knee and he was limping for weeks. It pained me. You shouldn't feel sorry for your parents, but that one hurt both him and me. We didn't only fight about how long I was allowed to stay out. Dad had very conservative views on certain things. We didn't see eye to eye, and over the years, I felt that feeling come over me more and more, which made me stop arguing. You can't feel sorry for someone and fight them. I no longer debated, but I let him speak his mind, and I wouldn't argue. The fact that we didn't see eye to eye made it easier on me. I didn't have to feel sorry for him, but that also raised the question, did I decide not to agree with him just to make it easier on myself? Did I choose to distance myself from him to make my life easier? When me and my wife had settled on the idea of moving to a farm, leaving the life in the city and the career, I had a vision about how life would be on a farm. But I was also scared that I would regret the change we were about to embark on. And what if I did just that? Regret what we had done? What would I do then? And most importantly, what would I tell everyone that was rooting for me when I told them that I was quitting my job to move to a farm to work on my YouTube career? Luckily for me, that hasn't happened yet. But there have been times when I've struggled. Like when the water froze this winter, or when the rain just wouldn't stop, or when the horses ran off and we couldn't find them. All of those things did in fact happen, but then there are brighter moments. Like the day I turned 40 and was given a welder. Without any experience, I set off welding and made myself a side table. I welded, painted and 3D printed a top for it within a day. Now that is freedom right there. That freedom was something I've never felt or had in my entire life before. It kind of threw me back to the feeling of childhood when you had no worries in the world. So when it came to this project, I wasn't going for the 90-degree welds. For my second attempt, I was going for bent pipes. There was one time when that feeling became stronger than ever. Mom and Dad were visiting us at the farm during summer. We'd gone to pick mushrooms and unwillingly he had decided to join us on that mushroom hunt. But when we eventually found mushrooms, he was happy as a child. I remember it like it was yesterday, some things more clearly than others. When we arrived back home, it was time to clean them before frying them and putting them on a buttery sandwich. And as he was doing just that, I corrected him. I said, "Please don't cut on the table without a cutting board." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." Now that doesn't sound like something, but the thing is, I'd never heard him say "I'm sorry" in my life up until that point. And it was something about the way he said it that made me feel sorry again. Maybe a stroke of weakness that he never showed otherwise. I just remembered it was so confusing. Our relation wasn't only sad stories though. We had a lot of good moments as well. I played the guitar and sang, which funny enough was one of his interests as well, although on the piano. I would show him new music I'd found and he would listen and we would talk about it. We had dinners together in the Japanese garden he had built and we found common ground on a lot of things as well. We never spoke about feelings, but this one time I remember as one of the best moments together with him. I was 18 years old and my 3-year-old relationship had just ended and I was wrecked. I was sitting on my bed when he came in asking how I was doing, and I couldn't hold it in. I just burst into tears. He comforted me, and it was just the way I needed it. He then went on to plan a vacation straight away, and the family left the same day for a very spontaneous vacation to Germany. I didn't understand it then, but the trip was to comfort me. I had a good couple of years without feeling that feeling, but then all of a sudden it hit me hard in 2015. Mom and Dad went on a holiday for a week, and I remember it so clearly. The day they arrived, my mom called me and said Dad had been sick the entire trip and that he'd been to the doctor first thing when they got back home. The doctor couldn't give a diagnosis, but the white blood cell count was really high, and I think I knew straight away, this isn't good. He fought for a little less than a year. I mean, he really tried all of it. Both the medical way, but also every bit of a chance there was with weird tips for leukemia, like drinking goat milk every day. And the feeling came back that year. Not because he had cancer, but because he refused to acknowledge it or talk about it. Every visit at the hospital, we talked about what car he wanted to buy when he was better, or what ideas he had for the garden. Whenever I brought up the cancer and how he was doing, he refused to talk about it. It was like he didn't want to acknowledge it himself. And that made me feel sorry for him. I also felt shame over feeling sorry for him for the longest time. But I've come to realize that it was just my feeling. It wasn't his, because he was very confident in what he was doing and the way he lived his life. This was 3 years before I started doing YouTube videos and becoming somewhat of a woodworker and maker. I kind of became what he was, but it wasn't until now that I realized that. And I myself had to become that to realize that I don't feel sorry for him anymore. I feel proud. He never ever told me what I should do other than to follow my passion. He showed me that life is about nurturing and following your curiosity and learning new things. He taught me to become a version of him, but as I was following his exact footsteps, I thought I wasn't. I thought I was going in the opposite direction because I thought we didn't see eye to eye. But we did. I've realized that now. When you've made something, who is the one you want to show it to? You were my dad, and you made me into what I am today. I wish you could see this, Dad. I bet it would have made you proud.